Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons. Donell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education. And Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. I'm Stacy Hurst, and I'm joined by Donell Pons and Lindsay Kemeny, as we are most every week. And this week, Lindsay, wind us up for the topic.
All right. Well, today we're talking about an article that was posted on educationnext.org by Leanna Lois. And I just want to get your thoughts on the title first before we dive into the article. Okay. So the title for our listeners is called The Cost of Overteaching Phonics. The Cost of Overteaching Phonics. And so what are just kind of like your knee-jerk reactions to that title? Donell, let's start with you.
I'm not going to lie. I went, oh, when I saw it, because I thought, oh no, not this again. That is initially my thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Little dread.
And can I answer? I have a specific reaction before I read the article to the title and then after.
Okay.
So before I read the article, when I saw the title, I kind of thought the same thing, Donell. That was my first instinct of oh, it's about phonics again. But then I had the thought of, well, I do see that. I do see some of that happening.
Sure.
After reading the article, I don't know, this is going to be a little controversial. I don't think they made a fantastic case for it. There's no really solid evidence about the cost. So that made me think it was a little bit of a marketing ploy with the title.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, there was a lot of controversy about this article online. A lot of people were talking about it on social media. And I think a lot of the biggest, I had like the same reaction seeing the title because I'm like, who's overteaching phonics, right? And I think that a lot of the comments that I saw, one person said, I wish the biggest problem we faced with literacy instruction was overteaching of phonics. And then all these people are commenting, like Pam Kastner, she says, she's going all across the country, visiting all these schools, and she doesn't see anywhere where they are teaching overteaching phonics. Mitchell Brookins chimed in too with some great comments just saying, is the overteaching in the room with us? And he's just saying, we aren't that far in our at-scale implementation to say that most schools are overteaching foundational skills. Over and over, people are like, not happening where I am. One person remarked about a local music teacher that had this activity scavenger hunt, but said, we're not going to do that again because the students couldn't read the clues. And we're talking mid-elementary to junior high. So I think, there's a danger to these clickbait titles. I think it just gives those balanced literacy advocates or people who aren't, necessarily advocates of systematic explicit phonics instruction. It just they love this because they're like, that's right. They're going to jump on this bandwagon, even though, yes, we always need to be careful and we can always refine our instruction. They're going to jump onto these titles and say, yep, see, we're doing it too much when maybe most of us aren't doing it enough.
Which made me ask the question, says who?
Yeah.
Says who? And guess who said it? Our friend Mark Seidenberg.
Yeah. It's an old quote too.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And we'll jump into some of, the stuff he says. But yeah, Donell, we're going to say something.
Well, just that when you dredged up Seidenberg, it was an old quote. And the thing about it, too, is it made it sound like everybody's adopted. And so now the discussion should be, are we teaching too much? And again, I'd argue, have everybody? Is everybody teaching? Have we all? I'd argue right there with the first point, I think.
What's the evidence? And how do we know? Yeah.
I don't think we are. And there's still a lot of people early on their journey that are just transitioning from balanced literacy to more of a, systematic approach very early on. And then we still have a lot of those ineffective practices like 3Qing and things, especially for those people, like we're just not all there yet.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid.
Which is why I think of, go ahead, Lindsay, because I think we're going to say the same thing, but you go ahead.
Well, I just don't want to take a step backwards and like shoot ourselves in the foot here. We have this great momentum going. We want to keep it going. We don't want people to be like, oh, okay, so I'm just going to do 15 minutes because we're not getting into the specifics of and we'll dive more into the article, but what were you going to say?
That's what I was thinking too. I feel like there's no governing body, but I think it's essential that we are more responsible with these kind of statements, that we think about where we're saying them and when. And I think I am not in disagreement with everything Mark Seidenberg says. I agree with the bulk of his research, right? What I have taken issue with in the past, and I'm doing right now, he seems to be a little bit of a contrarian with his timing. Like his book, even Reading at the Speed of Sight, came out when most people were doing balanced literacy. So everybody's zigging, he's zagging. We're talking about phonemic awareness. People are finally doing it and having conversations about it. And again, what he's saying is accurate, but, stop doing it without letters and kind of threw a wrench in the works. So just when we got some momentum. Now we're getting momentum with phonics and the same thing is happening. Now you're overteaching it, right? And he's quick to call out teachers. He does apologize when he does that. But I also want to know how many people has he taught how to read? And if this is an evidence-backed supposition, where is the evidence? And maybe he has it, but it wasn't mentioned in this article.
So in the introduction of this article, it says, it talks about that the reading wars have ended. The victor is clear. Phonics is the best way to teach kids how to read. So, are they over? I still see a lot of pushback, actually. So I don't think they are over, which is like what we're getting at, the timing of this, where we don't want to set ourselves back. Okay, and then it said another practice is taking hold at great cost to students, overteaching. And that's what we're going to dive into a little bit more about, like, what exactly do they mean by overteaching, because that can be misconstrued easily. And then Stacy, you were talking about Dr. Mark Seidenberg. He said, is quoted in here saying, reading teachers need not aim to teach every single pattern students will encounter in text. They simply need enough so that students can achieve that escape velocity, is what he called it, or that ability to start cracking the code on their own. And so and yes, I see that, especially as a first grade teacher. It is so exciting. You give some students you start teaching them the code, and then all of a sudden they take off and they can crack the code, the rest themselves. Not everyone, other people are going to need more, but it's so exciting to see when they do reach that escape velocity and they're flexing those vowels and they're reading accurately and even fluently on a regular passage. It's exciting. So how do we know when they reach that?
Yeah, and that's going to be different for every kid, right? That's the self-teaching mechanism. And we currently don't have a huge body of research to say, on average, it's at this point in a scope and sequence that students achieve that velocity. We just don't know.
Yeah. You don't know. It's different.
I've even seen debate over, is it 90% on a certain measure of fluency here, and is it 90% on a certain measurement over here? I mean, and it's still all up for debate. So even looking at an assessment or measurement. Here's one thing I do know. The more experienced and educated a teacher is, the better capacity they have to meet the needs of a larger and diverse group of learners when they're teaching reading. That's just baseline, I think.
Yeah.
That was something that kept coming up for me throughout this whole article, was that would depend on the teacher knowledge. Which I think is important. And Lindsay, you know that, because I know a few teachers that I have met in my lifetime that could teach any child how to read. And they have a great amount of knowledge in their practice that they apply.
It's like, it's a science and it's an art, and it's knowing who's ready for more, who needs more instruction, who's ready to take off, and at the beginning of the year in first grade, most of my students cannot crack the code on their own. Some of them sometimes come in reading, but most of them can't, and they're still sounding out 3-letter words. And then by December, I've got, several who are now just taking off. By January, more and more, February, more and more. And it's really neat to see. I don't want to hold anyone back, but everyone is still in my phonics instruction. And I think it's still really important for all of them, because for several reasons. One is spelling. And a lot of them can read, but they can't spell, and they need those phonics concepts. Others kind of rely a little bit on the context, so they can figure it out and they can flex the vowels and read pretty accurately. But as those words become bigger, like more than a 2-syllable word, multisyllabic word, I think it's really important to know that AI spells A and not just get that, I don't know. There's still there's huge advantages, I would say, in still having them being taught phonics. But I mean, it's very good point in here. How much phonics they should get per day? When should it stop? Across what grade levels? What order? For how long? Should they learn all 44 phonemes, all the spellings? There's still a lot of things that we don't know exactly from research. And I think even if we did, it's really depends on the students. Right?
Yeah, and I do think spelling and reading need to be differentiated by anybody who's reading this article, because we're talking about reading, but spelling does require a lot more explicit instruction in those patterns. And I think many of us have had the opportunity to teach students who seem to pick up reading faster than others, but their spelling still isn't where it needs to be.
Well, I would say, Stacy, you said we're talking about reading here. Well, the article is talking about phonics here, so they should be talking about spelling. And it's not, I don't think it's mentioned anywhere in here. It's just saying, are we even overteaching phonics? And it's just implying for reading. But in my mind, a lot of these things, I'm like, but you need that for spelling. You need that for spelling.
You're doing both.
And you need that for spelling. So it's like, I think the article
teacher is uncoupled.
Yeah. So you're not overteaching phonics if they can't spell.
Yeah. No, then we would argue that you're not teaching spelling well enough, which phonics is part of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And I think there were some good, just like the overall bullet points, and you brought these up, Lindsay, like spending too much time on less impactful skills.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would argue with that. Yeah. And I won't go into it, but then teaching extraneous skills and patterns, and teaching content that only the teacher needs to know.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll jump into that. I think like most of the, what is with the title kind of, and then we need, but I think there are a lot of actually good points throughout the article, because especially like if you listen to our podcast, then we're always talking about don't overcorrect, or we had episodes, like don't tip the boat. And we talked about Tim Shanahan's blog post, your pet peeves and different things. Like we like to get into the nuance of these because it's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray area. And so I thought there were some good, things to consider. We always want to improve our instruction. So it's like, you don't want to go into this like with your like horse blinders on, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about, okay, so the article goes into like who the overteaching impacts or who it thinks it impacts. And then we'll go into the 3 different areas, like you just alluded to, Stacy, of like the 3 of what exactly this article is talking about. What's the position? What does it mean by overteaching? So first it talked about affecting different kids in different ways. So it talked about the highest achieving students. I'm saying it, but maybe I should just say she because it's the author, right? She talked about the highest achieving students are going to be affected. She said they may be reading novels at home, sitting through lessons on skills they've mastered takes up time that could be spent reading, writing, learning deeply about science, history, and other subjects, and it can lead to disengagement. So let's talk about those high performing readers. What are your thoughts on those high performing students and how this affects them?
Obviously, again, this goes back to what I'm making the statement about a teacher who is well prepared, is receiving their own instruction, so they're learning and they understand, has the ability to meet the needs of a diverse environment of learners, right? So I liken it to teaching writing. When you're teaching writing in any high school classroom, you're not getting a classroom of kids who all write at the same level, have the same capability of writing. You're never getting that. I think there's not a teacher out there that isn't right now just nodding their head, oh my word, yes, especially the writing. And yet you're going to take all of those students from fall to spring and you're going to teach them all. And you haven't decided that, this group, I'm not going to teach anything because they don't really need anything. They've already learned. You're teaching them all. And so you're not asking that reading teacher to do anything different than all teachers are having to do every year when they get a classroom of students. And that is the subject, whatever it is you're responsible for teaching. You've got a classroom of students who come with different capabilities, in different ways of learning and different speeds and timings of learning. And you're taking them all from fall to spring and you're making improvement in whatever it is you're teaching. I think that's essentially, a key point I want to make here as we're talking about this.
Yeah, and I didn't jump right on it because I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Go ahead.
And I know you always have very valuable things to add, Donell. But I do think, in my experience, I have seen students disengage, but most of the time they're disengaging because they cannot do what is being asked of them to do. Mm-hmm. And I have taught, when I taught first grade, a few students come to mind that were accelerated learners. And I think there were other conversations I had with them as well for this relatively small amount of the day that I did teach phonics, and saying, okay, how can you make this more interesting for you, right? Because that's empowering them.
And Stacy, you said something critical. I noticed some students. Now, whether you were observing another classroom and watching, or whether you as a teacher are watching and observing this happening to your students, but you said some critical things there about, I observed some students disengaging. And for whatever the reason you happen to name here was they didn't have the skill or ability to probably keep up or process what was happening. But you noticed, that's key number one, is a teacher who's engaged, picks up and has the perception to go, this is what I'm seeing. And then it's what you do next, right?
I think it is still beneficial for our high achieving students to have phonics lessons in the lower grades, especially kindergarten, first grade, and I would say even second grade. I think even though they're reading, like I said, most of them in my experience cannot spell and they don't know these things for spelling. And so we need them for spelling. I integrate other things in my phonics lessons like handwriting. And as a first grade teacher, they all come in. No one can form their letters correctly. Yeah. And so I'm embedding that. I think if they're getting disengaged, it's usually a pacing issue. If you keep the pacing up, And there are ways you can differentiate within the lesson. For example, they could do multisyllabic words with AI while everyone else is doing single syllable AI words or whatever. There's things you can do like that. But even like my phonics lessons, we start on the rug. It is very quick. I introduce the concept. We choral read some words. That's okay. That's a few minutes. We go to our desks. They get out their whiteboards. They're spelling. These high achieving students need that in my experience. They've all needed that in first grade. And then what are we doing? We're doing a sentence dictation. They need that too. Then we're reading a word list. I can differentiate that word list and give them the same concept, but with harder multisyllabic words. Then what we're doing? We're reading a text. We're reading a decodable. And so that's another place I could say, if I need, I can give them a harder, or they could read something, harder. But we're talking 30 to 45 minutes here with a lot of information that I think they still need in my experience. Now, I'm not going to then go to small group and make them repeat a phonics lesson or
Right.
read a decodable again. Then they're reading little like chapter books or, whatever they're, depending on what they need. But I don't see it as a waste of time or an over teaching for them. And I think there's things you can do to keep them engaged. So
very well said.
I think it's trickier as you go up. So let's say you're third grade but you have, your phonics lessons are going to look a lot different in third grade, right? And they're probably a lot more on multisyllabic words and spelling and morphology. I think if the majority of your class was below grade level and you were having to do a lot of phonics, then that's a kind of a different situation where then you have your high achieving students. So you don't want them to sit through that phonics lesson. But in kindergarten and first grade, I would worry about them skipping that whole group phonics lesson because I think there's information they need, or they can't read the words in isolation very well because they just, they've kind of cracked the code, but not well enough. I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts initially on that.
Yeah. And that's intervention in MTSS, right? That helps as we move along.
Yeah, ideally.
And assessment will help with pacing too. Assessment's key, I think, in this conversation.
It is.
Because you can't make a blanket statement about everybody's population of students that they're teaching.
Yes. Okay. And Stacy, so that reminds me of what Louisa Motes said about this. So she was active in the chat on social media too about this article. And she said, if overteaching is a problem, it's because appropriate assessments have not been used and acted upon. And it's because educators have not been given a broad enough view of all the language-based skills their teaching must address. But she agreed that she doesn't feel it's a problem. Like, overall, we don't have a lot of overteaching happening.
Just David Kilpatrick has made this statement many times, and I think it's worth remembering, is he said, don't make assumptions about how students are performing till you've watched them perform those tasks, because it's the speed, it's the effort, it's the labor that oftentimes a student is using in order to get something done. And he's been often surprised at how a teacher makes an assumption about a student. Oh, because they were able to complete this. Did you see how they did it? Did you watch how they completed it? And then in watching the student, there's a great deal of effort still happening for that student, which says the student still needs help with this. The student still needs time with this. And I don't think we can say enough about that. So even with assessment, it's eyes on. It's the whole thing together.
Okay. And so then in the article, the author then goes to struggling readers. So she's saying overteaching affects our high performing students and our struggling readers. And this, she said, this did not make sense to me. So I have to read what she said. Overteaching reduces time for much needed reading practice. And she said, these kids for whom the self-teaching mechanism doesn't kick in easily, true, we know that, they require more examples and repetition for the most critical skills. Now, to me, that means they need more teaching. I think we have a verbiage, I don't know. To me, part of teaching is the application part. And I think they're separating these. I think the author's separating it and acting like you're just teaching and the student's never practicing. And to me, that is part of teaching.
And you don't want to do the thing that you can't do or that's really hard to do. Students aren't just going to do it. That's the issue. That's why I end up with so many students, older students in intervention. There's still a giant cavern between them being ready to take that on and enjoy the reading process on their own. They're nowhere near that.
Yeah, which goes into providing appropriate scaffolds as well. And like you're saying, Lindsay, that's what I call teaching. Mm-hmm. And part of that is giving the students the time to apply what you've been teaching them on a level that they can manage with your feedback.
Right. And with your feedback.
Mm-hmm. With your feedback, yes. And you want to hear students saying things like, I went home and I picked up, and if they're not saying things like that on their own, unprompted, that's telling you something too, right?
Yeah. So it's not like we can just go, we're done teaching and now they're going to go off and apply it. No, that's very much the teacher is involved as well. So I think the argument in here for struggling readers didn't make any sense to me. Like to me, I was like, that doesn't make sense. They need the over teaching and it seems like that's what you just described to me was teaching them more. They need more examples and repetition for most critical skills, right? That's what she said. And so I'm like, that is teaching.
Yeah. So maybe questioning what is the definition of teaching that she's operating with.
Yeah.
For over 40 years, Reading Horizons has helped educators build strong literacy foundations for students. Now with Ascend, they're supporting every learner and every tier through one unified solution, Ascend Mastery, a comprehensive pre-K through 5 core literacy program, and Ascend Focus, an adaptive K through 12 intervention. Learn more and explore how you can bring Ascend to your schools at readinghorizons.com/ascend. Implementations begin in the 2026 school year.
Okay, and now let's just go into, now she talks about that overteaching is happening in 3 main ways, and we'll just take each one of these. So the first one is spending too much time on less impactful skills. I think this is a great point. And she talked, one of her examples was rules, like over teaching, I guess, the rules, overemphasizing the rules, where she said that the problem arises when this process or the memorization of the rule becomes the focus of instruction, displacing what should be the end goal, which of course is reading and spelling. Oh, she did mention spelling. And then Louise Spear-Swirling is quoted saying that sometimes that being able to verbalize the rule is a prerequisite for moving on, and it shouldn't be. Have you seen that any programs, either of you, where they have to like recite the rule in order to move on?
No, and in fact, I think they're quite explicit about telling you not to do that. In my experience,
in the programs you've seen.
Yeah, which goes back to assessment. I mean, that sounds like assessment to me, but I don't know of any program that requires that of a student.
Yeah, I've never seen one either. And I was like, are there programs like that? Or is that something maybe that's misconstrued that the teacher's bringing to it to make sure they can, I've never seen that. I've never seen a teacher talk about that where, oh my gosh, that they have to memorize the rule before they go on. I haven't seen that.
I think critically, that just to mention too, Louise Spear-Swirling is quoted throughout this article, and I admire her and her work. We've had her on the previous episode, which was one of the great highlights of my career. But I wonder, was this a conversation with her, or is she piecemeal taking quotes out of things that were previously said in other places? I'm
assuming it was quotes pulled because the others have been. So.
Yeah.
She did say, Louise Spear-Swirling said that kids have trouble verbalizing the rule, but they can still learn the skill. And so, I mean, I think this is a good caution. Like, we don't need them to memorize the rule, but we do need them to be familiar enough with the rule that they can apply it. Now, I don't think rules are necessary for reading. I don't know, that might be controversial, but I don't think you need the rule for reading. I think you need it for spelling. Like the floss rule, it talks about the floss rule. I mean, come on,
That's
you don't need that
spelling
to read.
rule.
It's
Yeah.
SSFFL, you know, that's easy. But to spell it, you need to be familiar with the rule. You don't have to recite it, but you need to know how to apply it to spell.
Yeah, it goes back to the difference between receptive and expressive skills. You have lots of clues to read a floss word.
You know, guys, I'm just going to say that sometimes I've seen social media posts in other places where an educator may erroneously post something where they mistake instruction for reading or for spelling as instruction for reading. And so maybe folks are seeing that and interpreting, oh gosh, teachers have this idea. And I don't know if that's actually what they're doing in their classrooms, but sometimes I think when we go to express something, we're not careful enough about what it is we're saying. I've seen a few of those where I'm like, well, you've got to be more careful. Is that really what you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, and that's tricky too, because in the lower grades, we're teaching them together and we teach them to spell and it helps them read. So yeah.
And I do agree. And even in letters, we learn this. And it comes from Louisa Moats. And I think this is a place that there's more room, there's nuance here, and there's more room for research. But there does seem to be a point where that kind of separates, and you're teaching more of these skills for spelling than you are for reading. They have a reciprocal effect, but spelling has a greater impact on reading than reading does on spelling. And at some point you can't just be a good speller just because you read a lot. You really can't intuit many of those things about spelling just from reading a lot of words. So area for more.
Yeah. And it talked about that teachers have always used chant songs and mnemonic devices.
Yeah.
But at some point you need to be careful that that's not taking precedence, right? The whole goal, like it said, is reading and writing. And you don't want the focus to be so much on, oh, here's a little story that explains why these two vowels are going to say this sound, right? You don't want to like load all this extra information on them.
Yeah. And that actually did resonate with me because before I knew better, I had a chant chart and I could probably still recite most of it today. A, apple, B, ball, C, cat, right? But I saw with my striving readers, that did provide an extra step for them in getting to the sound of a word. I saw that over and over again. But I think as we look at these as scaffolds, she also mentions other mnemonic devices that are surely helpful at times. That's what we call a scaffold. And that, I don't know if the word scaffold was even mentioned in this article, but I think it's important to know that too. And when she mentioned that, it just reminded me of embedded mnemonics, which there is a boatload of research to support that idea and that concept. So, again, maybe not throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
That's interesting. I don't teach my students keywords. Like even when I taught kindergarten, I never did the A, apple, B, bear, but, or whatever it is. So I just added the schwa on there. So don't I know I just did that. So I never did that.
When we try to pronounce. Yeah.
And I never wanted them to like chant that because I think it adds it's just another thing to remember. And in fact, I don't even like when I hold up the letter, I don't want them to say both the name and the sound. Right. I just say, I'll be like, let's do the names. And we go through and do all the names. Now let's do the sounds. And we go to do the sounds because in my mind, then when they go to read, I don't want them to be like B, bat, B, and then or whatever. I just want them to go B, at, bat, and read the word. And so in my head, that's too much. We don't need to memorize the word. And
I did learn that chant chart. It was actually from Australia, the exact chant chart, and I learned it in my balanced literacy training. Yeah. So that's not something that you would see in a phonics program that is aligned with what the research says.
The B, the A, apple, A? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I think you would. There's a lot of explicit phonics programs that do that.
But like I said, not aligned with research. If they're aligned with what the research says, you probably won't see as much of that. They're getting right to the point faster. So
Well,
again, that
but I don't know.
resonated with me that could happen
Yeah.
if we don't know how to remove a scaffold.
Okay. So so that was the first thing, spending too much time on less impactful skills. Number 2, which is kind of related, teaching extraneous skills and patterns. This is another way the author is saying that overteaching happens. So, and examples of this would be like teaching blends and marking up words. So at what point is this a distraction from the reading and writing versus helping them with the decoding process?
And I think the other article you shared with us, Lindsay, to read in preparation for this is 11 Thoughts on Overteaching, on the Overteaching Conversation. And a phrase that came out of that article that I thought was very astute was the words right-sized. And I think that applies here. And I will say, like, I know the method I know best uses both markings and teaches blends, but does not the markings are a scaffold. They are there for initial analyzing, which there's a lot of research behind analyzing spelling patterns. And then also, we don't teach all the possible blends that there are. And I think in here it says you can reduce it by dozens of lessons, but in the method I know, there aren't dozens of blends, right? You're just teaching blends that are likely to stay together in syllabication. And most of them have liquid sounds that are harder for students to pronounce. So it helps with fluency. Like there's all kinds of things that you could say about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think overteaching, it matters depending. I think that right-sized is the key.
Yeah.
And the challenge becomes when legislation, we start putting this in the hands of legislators to mandate what's being taught. So that was one of the things that kept going through my head, having just gone through a legislative session. I was thinking how much of some of these aspects that we still haven't settled on, that are part of a teacher's background of knowledge and what's happening in their classroom, their understanding of how that's happening, become mandated. And that becomes a challenge to then go, oh, maybe we overprescribed. We didn't really know, so we shouldn't have said. So I think that can be a challenge.
Yeah, so I think it's a good warning not to overteach certain things like blends, because I've seen in programs where it's like, today we're doing BL, tomorrow we're doing BR, then we're doing CL, then we're doing CR. The next day we're going to do DR. The next day anyways, and spending that is the problem with that is you're never going to get through all the important phonics skills the students need to take off and reach that escape velocity where they can just start reading. So,
which is, that happy medium, because I think the same way about a magic E skill. Some programs spend days on A consonant E, O consonant E. They already know, they should have already proven they know the sounds and the letters. The pattern is the pattern. Give them lots of practice with it.
Yeah. So I think it's good to kind of take a critical view of our programs and the scope and sequence and see, especially if it's doing like a concept a week and you're like, oh my gosh, that's going to take forever. And it's Wednesday and my kids know that, or they're going to get it through, that mixed practice as we're kind of interleaving practice, right? So let's move on. And so I think that's important. And I think, the thing with blends, I mean, we've talked about the blends before on this podcast. And one thing it said, I mean, of course you never want to teach it like as a unit. And of course you want to teach it as what it is. It's two different sounds and they blend together. But in your classroom, if you're like, I want to spend a day on R blends and a day on S blends and a day on L blends, I say go for it, because it is harder to have students blend together 4 sounds where they've been doing only 3 sounds. And now they've got to practice 4, and that is harder. So we're going to spend some time practicing blending these sounds in my in our phonics lesson. So I guess I'm sort of quote unquote teaching the blends, but it's really an opportunity to practice blending those sounds. And we're going to just take 1 week to do that. And then we're moving on. We're going to do all those blends in a week, and we're going to keep moving, and they're going to master that as we keep going. I think it's good. And then some phonics skills, it talks about, you don't need to teach every single possible spelling for every single sound. And I agree with that as well. And it was kind of interesting. They talked about Devin Kern's research, where they found, he said the sweet spot was like teaching between 95 to 110 sound spelling patterns. But he's like, it's not like a rule, and he said that in the article. He's like, it's not like a rule. It's not like they only need 100 sounds and then they're ready. Because we know this is just, it's different for different students.
Yeah. And I love Devin's work and his resources finder. And we've recommended that on here before. But one example they gave in the article was the spelling OW.
I know.
They were saying ow and O. And they're like, but it usually says ow and rarely says O. But my thought was, but when it does say O, it's in some very common words.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we teach it and facilitate that set for variability, right? And that's where Finder is a very useful tool too.
Yeah, he was talking about, it's one of the reasons he created Finder. I love that Finder. It's devinkerns.com/Finder with a PH to our listeners. I use that website all the time to find words. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And in this part of the article, very interesting, but Dr. Seidenberg has this radical idea of he's working on a program that teaches just 100 words. And and it's untested, right? So I'm very curious to see, what does that mean exactly? Just 100 words. What does he mean by that? I don't know, but interesting.
Well, I look forward to seeing the evidence, and it would be great if he created his program, tested it, and then told us about it.
Yeah.
And then another, it also talked about, syllable types here, syllables. We did a whole podcast on that too. That can be controversial as well. And also phonemic awareness. And now this was very interesting because it didn't just say how to teach phonemic awareness. In the article, she says whether and how much to teach phonemic awareness. So I had circled that word whether and put a question mark, wait, whether to teach phonemic awareness? Is that a question now? And then she quotes Seidenberg saying, you can just go straight into phonics and the kids will learn about the phonemes as they're learning about sound spelling correspondences. And this is a big red flag to me, because to me, this is going backwards. This is what I used to do when I taught second grade years ago. I didn't even know phonemic awareness was a thing. And I just taught I barely taught phonics, I'll say, because I didn't know what it looked like back then. But I'm saying, hang on, this reads to me like someone who has maybe either not ever taught a struggling reader or just has watched a grandchild, a child learn how to read very easily and they could just pick it up. So absolutely, some kids don't need instruction in this and they just pick it up. But so many more need instruction in blending and segmenting. And so I just think this would be a huge step backwards if we're just go right into phonics and don't teach phonemic awareness.
And I think the key in the term phonemic awareness is awareness. Yeah. Our littles need to be aware that the words they've been co-articulating for 3, 4, 5 years of their lives are made up of sound, individual sounds, which I know Mark Seidenberg calls like a mirage or something like that.
Yeah, not a thing. Yeah, well.
But it can be a lifesaver to a kid who's struggling with a lot of those aspects. So what someone else's mirage is a lifesaver for another kid.
I mean, the question is how to best teach phonemic awareness. We want to be as efficient as possible. We don't want to waste time on 10, 15 minutes of oral only phonemic awareness. When do I add in letters? When is it appropriate not to do it with letters? Like I said, how much? The question should not be whether to teach it or not. So that I definitely take an issue with.
Yeah, and research supports your stance, Lindsay, because even the National Reading Panel stated it was critical. So, yeah.
Okay. And then the third way that it talked about how overteaching is happening is that teaching content that only the teacher needs to know. And I do agree with this. I think we had a really great episode. Stacy, you led it. Remember when you talked about, do we need to know how the toaster works, like all the mechanisms, or do I just need to know how to put my toast in and toast like put my bread in and make toast, right? And it's the same with the reading. We don't need little linguists. They don't need to know what a fricative is and be able to define it. We need them to be able to do the thing, which is read and write.
Yeah. And this part, I was like practically singing when I was reading it. And they start out by how the role that teacher excitement plays in this. Because when teachers learn these things for the first time, and I've seen this in my career over and over and over, where the question comes like, why didn't I learn this in college? And with my college students, they get excited when we learn certain aspects of our language. There are two things that kept coming to my mind. And that is, we've said this before as well, teachers make thousands of decisions in a day. Most of those decisions are in relation to how their students are responding to instruction. The more you know, the easier those decisions are going to be. That doesn't mean you have to teach everything you know to your students, right? And distinguishing what does the teacher need to know. Louisa Moats, again, is for the win on this one. She compares the structure of the English language to be the same thing as anatomy is to a doctor. You need to know that to be able to apply it. When I go to the doctor, he can use all the fancy names for parts of my knee that he wants to. I just need to know that my knee works. Right?
Yeah.
And he needs to help me do that. I don't need to know the parts of the knee. I don't need to name that. I need to know how to take care of my knees.
And to me, I think about if a teacher has really great understanding and you know they've been trained really well, what that looks like to me when I'm seeing it taught is it's so eloquent and so seamless. And the teacher knows exactly how to reach those students' needs so quickly. And I'm like, wow, that's a real-time teacher. Now, she's not using any of the language. I'm not seeing any of that. But what that translates into is, wow, what a quick, efficient, eloquent way to get to that teaching moment for that student. That's what it looks like.
And it can depend on the student too, how much information, like, so even, a lot of times within our science of reading community, people, they might say, well, that's not a heart word or said, there's a reason that AI is So you need to explain to the student, like pay, paid, say, said, right? Lay, laid. So there's a reason it's spelled like that. But listen, if it's a little kindergartner or a struggling first grader, that can be overwhelmed. That could be cognitive overload as well, to be like that we're trying to read this story. We want to read the word said, but so-and-so, this expert said I shouldn't just say AI spells and keep going, but give them all this information. That's too much for them. They're being bombarded at once. Just tell them in this word that AI is going to spell and we're going to keep going because we want to read. And you know what? Maybe later when they're, you can give that information to them. But it depends on the student, right? But your high achieving students are going to love that extra information. Oh, do you want to know why said is spelled that way? Let me tell you. So it's kind of, there's a lot of things to think about. The article has a very, very, in my opinion, good warning about that actual reading is getting squeezed out. I do think this is very common not to give our students enough time to apply the skills we're learning. And I don't think that means just go off and have them read. Like, I felt like that's kind of what was maybe implied with the way this article was. But I think very intentional, carefully orchestrated reading practice where they are reading aloud. They are doing partner reading or choral reading or reading in the small groups, opportunity for feedback. And it talked about a lot of times reading in context comes at the end of a phonics lesson and it's often skipped. And I think as teachers, this is really, really important. They're not getting enough practice and we need to make sure we allow for time for that. And I know we're running low on time, so just let's see, skipping forward a little bit. She said that not a single researcher she spoke with questioned the need for explicit teaching on how the code works. Okay, so that's accurate. We are just talking about skills and dosage. However, one thing I wanted to say, another little tidbit that Seidenberg argued was that explicit phonics instruction should end after first grade. What are your thoughts about that?
Nope.
No.
I would just I would respond with a question. Respectfully, Dr. Seidenberg, how many people have you taught how to read? Respectfully.
Well, and don't you love, Stacy, the quote right above it, he says, I've been trying to calibrate how much is enough. And the answer is you want to do enough explicit instruction to enable them to achieve this sort of breakthrough. The amount of explicit instruction you need to get to the point where they don't need so much explicit instruction. I'm like, what?
Yeah. We're all aiming for that. We do understand. Yeah. We do understand things like the set for variability that play into that and the self-teaching hypothesis.
Yeah.
We are aware.
I mean, I love knowing, like I spend, I take my phonics instruction very seriously as a first grade teacher. And I love the fact that I know in second grade, they're going to get this information again, because I think, you know what, they need this again. They need this for spelling. They need this to get more automatic with their reading. They need to work with multisyllabic words more than we do in first grade. And Louisa Motes commented on this. She said, and word level skills for reading, spelling, and vocabulary should definitely have a place for many grades beyond first grade. So, yes, definitely agree with Dr. Motes there.
You're here.
Okay, well, thank you, you guys. This was a fun article. It's always good to kind of challenge your thinking. And even if your knee-jerk reaction is like, no one is overteaching, and it's very possible not many people are, I think there's always room to refine and improve our practice. So I appreciate these kind of articles so that you can kind of take a hard look at some practices and think about what you can do to improve.
Yeah. And I think the big takeaways for the article, make sure you're allowing enough time for students to read with feedback, in addition to your explicit phonics instruction, right? Yeah. And also, let's be responsible about what we put out there in the world. I don't think, because I do worry about the teachers who feel like, who maybe are not doing enough phonics instruction and use this as an excuse to stop teaching it or to dial it back in a way that's not helpful for students.
Hopefully not. I think if they read through the article and not just look at the headline, then I think they will glean some good points.
Yeah. And taking the time to just really let it sink in and synthesize it, which, to be honest, I do have notes all over the article, but I haven't really, and there was much of it that resonated. So like you're saying, Lindsay, let's question our own practices, pay attention to the parts that I really responded to. And I do want to say then I need some evidence to agree with you on these things, right? I need some good evidence. So.
Well, you never should just take what one person says and just be like, that's it. That's what I'm doing. Right. So
that's true. I really highlighted for me too. I think about the three of us, and this conversation has been so fantastic, but the ways that we're responsible for teaching people how to read right now and just the power that knowledge and practice have in this situation too. It helps with everything that was called out as an issue, right? Teacher knowledge and experience is key. So thank you, Lindsay, for that topic.
That was fun.
Donell, any closing thoughts on it before I end the episode? Thank you guys so much. It's always fun to talk about these things. I think that's at the heart of why we wanted to have our podcast, right? Yeah. And we've said it before, we'd open it up to discussion with many other people too, if we could. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully you will join us for the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.